Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to see you here on this rainy evening. You're in for a real treat. If you have your cell phones or other electronic devices turned on, please turn them off. I'm Connie Stolo. I'm the chairman of the Education Committee here at the Jenks Center. And my committee brings in a couple of speakers every month. Tonight we are very fortunate to have John McConnell. He's been here before with his paintings and his lectures on architecture. And I'm sure you're going to have a great evening. John McConnell is an architect and the founding principal of McConnell Plus Partners Architects in Winchester, specializing in residential and small-scale commercial and institutional design. He was awarded a BA degree in English by Michigan State University, followed in 1975 by a Master in Architecture degree from Harvard University. He's also adjunct professor of American Architectural History at Boston College and lectures in architectural history at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. In addition, he has recently served as lecturer in residence for the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Handel and Haydn Society, and a large variety of private and corporate groups. In addition, John has devoted himself to oil painting since 1990, specializing in traditional landscape painting and portraiture. He is active in a variety of civic organizations in Winchester, where he lives. Please join me in welcoming John McConnell.
I'm now going to do the ignominious thing of turning my back to you for the duration of the evening, and so that I can see the pictures that I'm going to be describing to you. We're going to take a more in-depth look than I usually do in any of the lectures that I give here. We're going to look at a very specific time period. It happens to be 150 years long. But not all that much happens in 150 years. We're talking about colonial architecture tonight, and everyone has this idea from realtors and so forth that colonial is this very large and amorphous kind of description of something that isn't contemporary or Victorian. And to architectural historians, those words have very different meanings than they do to realtors. And so what I'm going to do tonight is attempt to define for you in hopefully a semi-memorable way what colonial architecture really is. And the simplest definition that we need to grasp is that colonial describes in this country everything that happened before 1775 and nothing that happened after 1775, when we ceased to be colonies and became a nation, and bringing then down the curtain of history on colonial and colonial culture. Now, there are, during the entire span of our colonial period, beginning with the settling of Jamestown in 1607, the first permanent English settlement, up until the Declaration of Independence, there are three distinct styles, and that's what we're going to examine tonight. The first of them is known only by the name First Period, so it's pretty easy to remember. And this is from 1607 until around 1690, 1695 or so. And then there's a great change that we'll talk about, and a new and far more sophisticated urban style from England supplants the First Period. And the leading architect in England, whose work is that which everyone seeks to emulate, is the great Sir Christopher Wren. And so Wren's architecture, the style in this country, in these colonies, the style name we give to this stuff is Wren Baroque. We use two words, so we add his name to Baroque architecture, and I'll explain what that is all about. And then, and that goes up to the time of the Revolution. Now, starting in about 1740, there arises yet another style that is the currently fashionable style in England. And it's architecture that is based on the work of a single architect. In fact, probably the most famous architect in the Western tradition, certainly the most copied architect, who is Andrea Palladio. an Italian architect from the second half of the Renaissance. And so the chief proponent of Palladian architecture in England is an architect named James Gibbs. And so his name gets stuck on the American style. We say Gibbs Palladian. So those are the three styles: first period, Wren Baroque, and Gibbs Palladian. Okay? Turn it up. Turn on the advanced technology here. Colonial architecture begins with two different sorts of forces. The force of nature and the force of human volition. Nature, in this case, meaning a sort of wilderness, an unknown and unsettled continent, being billed to English people as a new Garden of Eden, a place where one can have this incredibly fruitful life and have landowning privileges that are denied in the mother country and all of that. So here's a slide of wilderness on the left. It isn't really wilderness, it's New Hampshire. But we can pretend it's wilderness. A vast sea of trees that goes who knows how many thousands of miles. That has its, as people are about to discover, its own very distinct climate and topography. And the slide on the left is half of a painting. There are some more dudes on the left-hand side here that we don't see. This is the board of directors of a corporation. This is a corporation chartered by the King of England to plant Englishmen in what was rapidly becoming a Spanish and French continent. The company was called the Virginia Company, named in honor of the Queen. I said king, but I meant queen. So these people are setting about to do something that Spain and France didn't do, which is populate by military and religious means. These people are setting about by using capitalism as the tool for propagating English people in the New World, to send people to grow crops and to send those crops back to the mother country, and to establish links of trade rather than of merely military rule. So the big surprise comes when these people are successful in getting ordinary landowning Englishmen, people from the upper echelons of society, but who are largely from agrarian parts of England and largely East Anglia to the east and north of London, to come to the New World, to come 3,000 miles across an ocean with no hope of ever going back again, to settle in what turns out to be much more hostile conditions than they would have been led to believe. So the first kinds of architecture that we see, beyond pits in the ground and bark-covered huts that ensured some kind of basic survival, is seen in buildings like this. On the left, this is a recreation in Jamestown of the original houses inside this sort of triangular fortress that they built for themselves. What we see here looks fairly rude, but in fact, it's what they knew how to do. None of these people were certainly not architects, let alone builders or people very much skilled in constructing things, but they managed. And what they knew was a sort of 400-year-old tradition in England by the time that they were settling here in the early 17th century. This was a medieval tradition from the Middle Ages in England of building houses with roughly shaped felled trees, shaped into sort of these heavy timbers that have been pegged together in a kind of framework with a thatched roof on top, and then the infill between the members of wood here is a method of construction known as wattle and daub. Wattle and daub is the wattle part is a sort of flat basket of thin twigs that has been woven together and pinned into place in the hole. And then daub is clay that's been daubed on over the outside of that to make it impervious to air and, in theory, rain. Well, the big shock for everybody here is that in England, where the temperature almost never goes higher than 70 degrees and never goes lower than 40, is that in Virginia, it goes considerably higher than 70. It gets to 110, and it goes down to 0 in the wintertime. And so the great swing of temperature that you and I all live with, don't think anything about, was all new to them. And it was new to the Waddles and Dobbs of the world as well. With the great expansion and contraction of heat and cold, this cracked and fell out and was completely worthless. It didn't serve the purpose at all. And so the idea of taking a medieval English tradition, building in wood, had to be modified to suit New World conditions. But the tradition, as I said, is ancient, and it is, above all, sort of reminded them of England, of the country that they were never going to go back to again. And so the first urge here is a kind of cultural identity of settlers. You would do the same thing. You would try to make your new settlement look like Winchester, for example. Here they are trying to make it look like home so that they don't feel totally alienated from their own culture and their own place. Now, I refer to this as medieval, and what that means is that it's part of the tradition throughout Europe of making, let's see if I can focus with this. The answer is no. Making buildings out of timbers. By 1600, when Englishmen were coming here to build, they found vast forests that they could use for their raw matter, the raw material to make buildings out of. But in England, by 1600, there weren't very many forests. The forests that were in private hands. The gentry owned the forests and kept them for hunting grounds and for their own fireplaces. But here we see on the right the kind of European tradition that these rude little huts in Jamestown comes from. This happens to be in France. It's in Dijon. No, it's in Angers, I'm sorry. But you can see that the timbers are left on display. You can see the framework of the house. In this case, it's not wattle and daub, but brick being used as an infill here, which is a far more sort of substantive kind of material. And this is a building that would have been built about the same time that the great cathedrals were being built. In this case, this is the Cathedral of Reims, also in France, the great coronation cathedral of kings and queens of France, which is one of the great high water marks of the great medieval style, which we know, of course, by the very familiar name Gothic. This is a grand piece of Gothic architecture. And in its own way, the little house in Angers is equally Gothic. And in its own way, the little rude huts in Jamestown are equally Gothic. Now, Gothic is one of the two great traditions in Western architecture. I oversimplify here, but it's a useful kind of distinction. The architecture of the Middle Ages is Gothic. The architecture that came before it in ancient Greece and ancient Rome is what we call classical architecture. So the Gothic tradition and the classical tradition have defined much of the architecture in both Europe and in this country up through the 19th century. And it's only really with the sort of the invention of industrialized modernism that we live with now that we have something that perhaps is a third kind of tradition. Gothic architecture tends to be textured, it tends to be vertical, and it tends to be, although we're not looking at it in this building, asymmetrical. Classical architecture, this little temple called the Thesion that's in Athens, is smooth, is horizontal, is symmetrical. It's static and permanent, whereas Gothic architecture seems to be in motion. It's dynamic. And classical architecture tends to be monochrome, usually white or gray. And Gothic architecture frequently is more highly colored based on a series of different colored building materials. So keep those kinds of distinctions in mind as we move forward here. Now back to the Gothic, which is really where American architecture begins. Very early on, by about 1636, Virginians had learned that building in wood and wattle dog was insubstantial, that even the wood would tend to rot in a very humid climate. And the solution to that was to build in something more permanent. Virginia is built on the most gorgeous red clay you can imagine, and it became the perfect material to make bricks with. So even by 1611 in Jamestown, they were making brick. Brick is permanent, whereas wood construction is not. So here's the earliest little English house that we know of. It's in Virginia, it's down near Virginia Beach, called the Adam Thorogood House. Thorogood had been an indentured servant when he first came here, worked off his indenture, and then amassed a fortune in land and became a wealthy plantation owner. He grew tobacco to send back to England. And this is the grand house that he built for himself. The Thorogood House is shaped like the earlier little huts that we were looking at. It has a very steeply pitched roof. It has a certain kind of verticality to it that marks it as a kind of Gothic building, although it's now not at the high style level of the great cathedral, but at the very opposite end of the scale, what we call the folk level of building. It basically consists of two rooms, one on either side of the ground floor, the hall and the parlor. The hall was the kitchen and dining room by day and the master bedroom at night, and the family room. And the parlor was the good room where people never went unless company came to call, and if you had a nice piece of furniture, that's where you kept it. The plug on this is, there we go, not cooperating. And we see in the Thorogood House one of the first climatological transpositions that happens to this English medieval architecture in a very hot climate. We see the chimneys here have migrated to the end of the house rather than being inside. During most of the year in Virginia, what you need to do is get rid of heat from fires burning in a fireplace for cooking. And so 3 of the 4 walls of the fireplace here have been put outside of the house so that the heat radiates out rather than into the house. The other climatological thing is this door. There's another door on the back side of the house, which was connected by a little corridor made of sheets of wood. And in the hot weather, the doors would be left open so that if there were any breezes around, they would be induced to go through the house and sort of flush stale air out. And so we see a kind of adaptation of an English tradition, a medieval Gothic tradition, to new American conditions. The windows are typically English. We have 4 pieces of glass called sash. We have 4 pieces of sash here. The 2 bottom ones move. They are hinged on the side and they open like doors. That's called casement windows. And then the ones above are fixed. They don't move. Those are called transoms. And of course the diamond painting, as you all know, is pretty traditional of this time period. Glass was a rare commodity. It had to come from England initially and came in small pieces. And so they learned to put a whole lot of little pieces together here in this diamond pattern to reinforce that sort of thing. Now, the next sort of rich guy to come along in the next generation was I can't remember his name because the house is not known by his name. This is the next major plantation home from about 1654 or so, and it's called Bacon's Castle. It's named for a firebrand revolutionary who had a bone to pick with the king and started a rebellion in colonial Virginia named Nathaniel Bacon, who was eventually suppressed, but this was his headquarters. This is also a plantation home, like the Thorogood home, except it's another story tall. It's 2 full stories plus bedrooms in the attic, what they would have called chambers, which we had also in the Thorogood house, made of brick, but there's a big difference here. It shares with the Thorogood house a very steeply pitched roof, and these chimneys now that are outside the ends of the house. But unlike the Thorogood house, it's completely symmetrical. There's an imaginary line right here in the middle, and the right half is a mirror image of the left half. The windows are exactly equally placed. This feature, which is called a porch, and then there's a little bedroom up above that, was originally the entryway. This was a door originally, not a window, and it had this funny little white triangle put over the doorway in imitation of what somebody, whoever designed this house, remembered earlier, 30 years earlier, in England. that the grand country houses of England were beginning to adopt a revived classical architecture, a revised Roman architecture, revived, I should say, into country houses in England. This is the influence of the Renaissance in Italy, a rebirth of classical architecture. And along with classical architecture comes certain attributes like symmetry, which is more classical than it is Gothic. And the little white triangle is a kind of cartoon memory of the thing that surrounded the doorways in grand houses, modern houses in England, which was a little kind of Roman temple front. The end of a temple is triangular, as we just looked at, and that's called a pediment, standing on columns. And the columns were used to frame the doorway with a kind of pediment above, symbolizing the place of entry. Come in for shelter in this building through this portal. And so in England, it was becoming popular to put gaudy temple fronts around doorways. The final thing that we see here is a kind of horizontal element, which is more classical than it is Gothic. It's called a string course, and it projects out from the wall of the building a bit. And it occurs just exactly where the second floor is. And that is because of structural reasons. The walls of this house are solid brick, 3 bricks thick. And in order for the second floor joists, or the beams that are carrying the floor, to have a wall to sit on, to carry their weight to the ground, a ledge was created on the inside face of that wall by pushing those bricks out a little bit, and thereby making this kind of stripe, which is augmented by being covered with plaster and painted white. And so we have the kind of dominating horizontality going on here that you expect of classical architecture. Here is the plan of this house. There is another one of these things in the back that has the staircase in it. And then, typical of the Thorogood house also, a hall and a parlor, and then fireplaces now on 3 levels, gathered together outside the end wall of the house, which looks like this. This is the grandest thing that was built anywhere in the English colonies in the 1650s. And it's borrowing yet another style element that British people thought up to the minute at the time, which is borrowing architecture from the Low Countries, from Flanders particularly. This is called Flemish gable, with the kind of the alternating circles and squares going up. And indeed, the whole brick wall, the end wall of the house, rises higher than the roof, so that there can be this sculpted kind of thing. And then, of course, the chimneys have been turned 45 degrees to make a kind of sculpture out of the whole thing. It's all very grand at some point. And so this was sort of the state of the art in first period Virginia. Now, the other kind of building that there was, other than plantation homes in Virginia, were churches. This is the earliest known English church in the New World. It's St. Luke's Church, and it's in Isle of Wight County, Virginia, south of the River James from Jamestown. The parish churches, because everything in Virginia was centered on plantations, and they were very distant from one another. Each parish was usually 3 or 4 plantations that had fairly substantial populations. And the parish church was built somewhere in the wilderness, equidistant from all of them. And St. Luke's is a perfect example of that. St. Luke's is out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by its little churchyard here, and was built in 2 different campaigns. The basic body of the church was built first. Some historians date it to about 1638, which is very early. On fairly scanty evidence, there's almost illegible date that has been incised into one of the bricks that they found there. Others think the building is later than that, but most historians now agree that it's from the 1630s. And then the tower was put on just a little bit later. The whole thing is an imitation of what they knew, which was small-town English parish churches. This is the Church of St. Miriam, which is in Cornwall, way out at the western tip of England, and it's typical of Gothic parish churches. It has 3 parts. It has a long nave and a chancel at the end where the altar is. The doorway in England is always on the south side here. So we see this is the front door to this church. It's the secondary door in the tower is really doesn't matter so much. The baptistry is in there usually at the bottom of the tower. So this is where you go in. And then the third element is, of course, the tower, which generally has a belfry, and it's the bells that let people know that it's time to come to church, or it's time to stop working in the fields and go home, or whatever is the current sort of clock-organized activity. So here's what people 3,000 miles away were trying to do, which is build a building in brick that imitated buildings like this. Here we are up a little bit closer. You see the basic parts, except for the absence of the south porch. There's no going in here on the side. It's much smaller. We have these Flemish gables again, this time just stepped up. And somebody remembered that there are pinnacles, these peak things. God knows what they look like. I can't remember. That was 30 years ago, or 15 years ago. So somebody's trying to make those out of brick here. And the dead giveaway is the presence of pointed arched windows, which are, of course, Gothic and not classical. A steeply pitched roof and all of that, and voila, you have as close a facsimile to a Gothic building that could be managed in the wilderness. Here's the end wall, the window, the great window that's behind the altar in the chancel. And you see all of these more or less folk-level Gothic elements going on here. The interesting thing is the tower, it comes a little bit later, 20 or 25 years later. We see classical elements. We see string horses. We see these blocks of what are supposed to be stone, but aren't. They're just brick at the corner called quoins that are strengthening the corner here. And those are elements of classical architecture. Rounded arched openings in most of the major cases. And then, again, this funny little cartoon of a pediment placed over the doorway, because somebody remembered that there were white triangles over the doorways in England. So what you get is a little white triangle. It's not really a pediment yet, but it's somebody's idea of it. The more interesting thing is the interior. And here we have a timbered roof here, which is all they could manage. There's, of course, no stone above your head. Here's the rood screen that separates the chancel area from where the worshipers sit. And the way that the timbers have been fastened together here creates this impression of a kind of vault going over your head that was somebody's memory of what churches looked like back home in England. Here's the interior of that English church we were just looking at in Cornwall, where we see the same thing. It has side aisles in this case. The nave is taller in the middle, but not tall enough to get clerestory windows in there. And still, this is done out of plaster and with wooden trusses up above where you can't see them. And it, in its turn, is trying to imitate its betters in English architecture, such as Sherborne Abbey, which is the full, high-developed, high watermark of English Gothic architecture with this phenomenal fan vaulting overhead. Never ever see that in France. It's only an English thing to make ornament out of the vaults. And so it's really the affinity between St. Luke's and it's somebody trying out of wood to make something that looks like this, that gives in a remote wilderness in 1630 the facsimile of high-style architecture back home. So that's that's a big deal. So there are all these little parish churches from the first period are still standing around in Virginia, and they're just wonderful. I'll just show you this one more. St. Peter's in New Kent County in Virginia. This was the childhood parish home of Martha Washington, for those who care about this sort of thing. And again, like St. Luke's, we have a Flemish sort of Gothic body to the church, and by the time they built the tower, we get rounded arches and string courses and sort of strengthened corners and all this incipient classical stuff coming along that hasn't yet sort of come to fruition. Now, we've only just talked about Virginia so far, but we can certainly move north to 1620 and to Plymouth, Massachusetts, and see a variant of the same sort of thing. This is Plymouth Plantation, of course, which is a magnificent recreation of the Pilgrim colony in, I think, 1626 or something. I'm trying to remember what year is supposedly recreated here. But we see on this side, one of these little huts. Instead of building, wattle and daub doesn't work here either because it was predominantly cold. They were in the middle of the little ice age here, much colder than in Virginia. And so this is the same kind of hut that the people in Jamestown built, But in this case, the wattle of dogwood fall out, and instead of building in brick, they learned to clamp these boards over the outside of the frame and make a kind of weather-tight, although very thin, skin. The skin here is only about an inch thick, protecting them from the howling winds and the howling wolves and the howling Native Americans, I guess. But anyway, so this is sort of early form of a hut that later gives way to this kind of a building, a big box made of wood, never ever painted. They're allowed to weather until they're dark brown, usually with now wooden shingles for the roof. And these, instead of vertical, we now have horizontal boards over the heavy timber frame that overlap one another so that they can move with expansion and contraction. And these boards are called clapboards, which is the way that our houses, if you live in a wood frame house, probably were built. Nowadays we use concrete planks or, of course, vinyl that's stamped to look like wood. We're in an age of fakery here. The difference between Massachusetts and Virginia during the first period is that Massachusetts was founded on the basis of towns. There were no towns other than Virginia, other than Jamestown in Virginia. The basis of civilization there was the plantation, which was a kind of little town. But here it was a town with houses drawn close to one another for kind of defense and also, of course, for self-observation. This was a rigorously policed community that was founded on the Puritan version of Sharia law. This is kind of a religious conflation with ideas of government. So Massachusetts is blessed with having several hundred first period houses still around, 400 years later. This is the earliest of them from about 1655 up in Ipswich. It's the Whipple House, very well known. It's low to the ground, of course, low ceilings. Nothing looks more like the Middle Ages than the Whipple House here. And again, with this is typical medieval English architecture. They have forward-facing gables, wooden roof, weathered clapboards on the outside, and we'll see more details in a minute. The big difference here is, of course, look where the chimney is. Far from having migrated to the end walls, it's staying in the middle so that a maximum amount of heat in the winter would radiate into the house rather than out of it. So there's this great pile of masonry there doing that kind of early furnace kind of job. Here's the end wall of the Whipple House. We see our old friend casement windows here. But what we see is a house that each floor sort of is bigger than the one below it. It leans out over. This is called a jetty. And jettying is a kind of traditional English medieval thing. Here's an English medieval row of half-timbered houses. I don't know what town this is. We see old medieval cars here. But the thing to notice is the jetty going on. Now, in a town in the Middle Ages, it doesn't have to be England, it could be anywhere, they were always surrounded by walls for reasons of defense, and the streets were very narrow, but they had to be wide enough to allow two ox carts to pass one another in the street. But once you got above the height of an ox cart, you could make your house bigger. You could come back out over the street by a foot or so and pick up valuable space in a very cramped kind of town, which is what really is going on here. Shops and stables were on the ground floor and living quarters up above. And there were actually even little trapdoors here so that in the morning you could throw your, they called it night soil, into the street, and then pigs would come along and get rid of it. What fun the Middle Ages were. Anyway, so you get the idea of sort of half timbering here. And so all of these first period houses have these very traditional timbered frames on them. Here's a diagram of it. Every single stick here has a name. For example, the ones that go from front to back along the chimney are called the chimney girts. And the ones that come out from the girts are called the summer beams. And these are end girts. These are rafters, and these are purlins, and they all get very specific names going on here. And so if you go in the Whipple House, you see this. It's very low. Most sort of normal American men now at about 6 feet would pretty much bump their heads on the summer beam here that we're seeing going out to the end wall here. This is the parlor because it has good furniture in it. And you can see the floor joists that are carrying the second floor up above. Here's another one. I just love this one, particularly this image with the barren tree. The little puppy is kind of cute, but this is the Parson Capon house of about 1683 in Topsfield, Massachusetts. A lot of them are up on the North Shore. And you can see that it's asymmetrical. The windows aren't exactly placed according to sort of the abstraction of geometric symmetry. And both the second floor and then the attic floor above overhang what's below. And we get this typical, the only ornament that Puritans allow themselves, which is this onion bulb-shaped drop called a pendule that's coming down here. We see those all over the place. This is the Jackson House in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Same thing. This is the very image of an American building. A skin that's only an inch thick. And that means that the windows have to be right up in plane with that skin. In a building with a thick wall, the windows would be set back in a shadowed recess, and you would understand the substantial quality of that building. Here it looks like a balloon with a very, very thin skin. Here's a hall and parlor house. It's the only first period house left in the city of Boston. It's the Paul Revere house from about 1685. Although Paul Revere didn't build it, it was almost 80 years old when he moved his family into it. We see the parlor up front. The hall the building's L-shaped. The hall, because it was a narrow urban lot, the hall had to get built to the rear here. But otherwise it has all of the attributes, casement windows, pendils, jetties, that we would expect in a typical first period house. And down in Farmington, Connecticut, here's the Whitman House, which is another first period house that has the other kind of traditional expansion. A lean-to has been built on the rear of this house to make it 2 rooms deep rather than 1 room deep. And usually the kitchen then migrated to the back and a bunch of storage rooms back there. And this shape, with a short roof in the front and a long roof in the back, reminded the settlers of the little box that they all had in their kitchen where they kept a very precious commodity, which was salt. And so the shape becomes known as the salt box shape for a house. And that pertains only to first period houses and only to houses that have had this the shed addition put on the back side. Okay, and like Virginia, the only other major building type was the religious building. But you notice I'm not calling it a church. Puritans took great pains to not refer to their buildings as churches. They called them meeting houses instead, the buildings in which they worshiped, but they were also the buildings in which they enacted laws to govern themselves. This is one that no longer exists, that was in Lynn, and it was apparently so dark inside that it got nicknamed the Old Tunnel. But they're boxes rather than long and narrow buildings with an altar at one end. There's no altar at all here. They're boxes with a hipped roof and a belfry on the top to let people know that they needed to come and assemble in the meeting house. The Puritans took great pains to radically expunge any vestige of God other than in their thoughts from their buildings. They were Puritans after all. They wanted to purify the Church of England from its horrible popish Roman Catholic sort of practices, and so everything was as severely plain. This was another one. This was in West Springfield, Massachusetts. And then we have the only one that's left in New England is the Old Ship Meeting House down in Hingham, Massachusetts. Again, from around 1680 or so. It's had later additions. We see a pediment here on the entryway, which is not original to the building. Otherwise, it's a box with a hipped roof and a belfry on the top. And that was pretty typical. Here's a dark view of the interior of it. There are balconies on 3 sides and then a great pulpit that dominates everybody's view, with always twin windows behind, so that the preacher, talking to you like I'm going to do tonight for 3 hours, has the light of God behind him, and he becomes this huge being silhouette telling you all that you're damned into hell. Anyway, it's called the Old Ship because of something you can't see, which is the open rafterwork inside that reminds everyone of a ship's hull turned upside down. Now, the Meeting House went on beyond the American Revolution. Certainly Puritanism morphed into Congregationalism, and then into Trinitarianism and Unitarianism and Universalism and all the other isms that grew out of that. But when you travel around New England, as New Englanders, you have the secret knowledge to know that when you encounter a building like this, which is in Farmington, Connecticut, it's not a church. Stupid foreigners from other parts of the country coming here think of this as a church, but it isn't. And of course I use the word stupid jokingly. But the way that you tell is, where is the front door? It's on the side. The pulpit is opposite here. It's not long and narrow like a church. But you enter and the pulpit is ahead of you on the other side of the building there. So that's kind of typical of meeting houses always. And this was after Congregationalists were so jealous of Anglicans that they began to imitate Anglican architecture and put steeples on their meeting houses. Okay, now for something completely different. Oh, I forgot I had this in here. Here's another, obviously, meeting house. This is in Jaffrey Center, New Hampshire, up near on the way to Mount Monadnock. Okay, 1695, 1700, who's quibbling? There's a great change. And these two images kind of encapsulate the state of affairs in the British colonies around the year 1700 or so. On the left is an image of the South. This is a young girl who grew up on a plantation making a drawing of her house and her world, in fact, which is the houses up on the hill. There are scattered about kitchens and slave quarters and barns and all that sort of thing. And virtually every plantation in Virginia had access to some kind of river. The whole of Tidewater, Virginia is laced with rivers so that ships from England could tie up right there on your plantation and load your products and unload window glass and dresses and books and then sail back to England again. So this is this kind of ideal world. Look at grapes hanging from the tree and birds flying. It's this sort of idyllic vision of life by about 1700. How far we've come in 90 years from bare survival to certain kinds of luxuries. And the other is, of course, the 1722 Bonner map of the city of Boston, the town of Boston, with its, what seems to us, even to this day, chaotic street pattern. Basically an island connected by this thin strap of spaghetti down here called the Neck, to the mainland of America, which is, at that part is known as Roxbury. Here's Boston Harbor, was this half-moon-shaped bay with long wharf extending King Street out to the east. And then there's a series of streets where King Street meets the main drag that leads you down to the Neck here. So this is the road to America, today called Washington Street. And this is the road to England, today called State Street. And where they crossed was the center of town. It's where the meeting house was built. And the House of Government was built there. So what happened about this time? Well, what happened was that the Crown of England, the King, reneged on his charter to the Puritans in Massachusetts. He canceled the private charter that they had and substituted a royal crown charter, instituting a royal governor who stood in place of the king, and establishing the Church of England as the official church of the colony. They didn't have to worship in the Church of England if they didn't want to, but they had to pay taxes to support it. With this change, we have now people other than Puritans anxious to settle in the New World from England. So we get a whole new class of people coming from the great cities rather than the farms of England, who are, among other things, tradespeople. They know lots of stuff, including familiarity with up-to-the-minute architecture in England. And it isn't medieval anymore. And so all the glaziers and the bricklayers and the carpenters and the masons and everybody else who come flooding in to places like Boston and other centers of civilization bring with them all this modern knowledge. And their world was shaped under the aegis of this guy, Sir Christopher Wren, and whose architecture sort of dominates the 1600s in England. In the background here, of course, is his most well-known building, which is St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where the Iron Lady was just laid to rest. a few weeks ago. And his architecture borrows, here it is again, borrows from continental Italy. Italy, of course, starting about 1400, in Italy there arose a kind of renewed interest in Roman architecture after many centuries of medieval kinds of architecture. And they thought they were rediscovering Rome. They weren't. They were inventing a new kind of architecture using Roman parts that we call Renaissance architecture. So from about 1400 to about 1600, we have various kinds of Renaissance architecture. And then around 1600, there's a change. It started in part by the Vatican in response to the Luther-derived Protestant Reformation. There's a movement called the Counter-Reformation. And the church decided that it was time to start building sexy churches to get people to come back to church. And so you can think of the Baroque as kind of Renaissance Roman architecture, but that has been put into a microwave oven for 5 minutes on high, and when it comes out, it's all deformed and curved and melted and then covered with ornaments. So here's the rather plain exterior of St. Paul's, but here's a view just of the choir, just this little, the inside of this piece of it beyond the dome, to see the kind of grandeur and all this kind of curvaceousness that's going on here. Look particularly at the baldacchino that's above the high altar here. Its columns are all twisty. The towers over here are made up out of all kinds of rounded parts and curving things and all of that. Well, Wren is imitating his Italian forebears in this, the precursors of Baroque architecture. One of them is Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and another is Carlo Borromini. And here's one of Borromini's favorite buildings, famous buildings. It's a tiny little church in Rome called St. Charles at the Four Fountains, San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane. And you can see that it's Roman architecture with Roman columns and cornices and all that. But look, it's all melted and curving and saying, "Wee, I'm loose and fun. Come on inside." And when you do, oops, oh, I grabbed the wrong slide. Okay, when you do, it looks just the same on the inside as it does on the outside. Oops. Okay, that was supposed to be the interior, which is an oval dome and lots of curving stuff. So you can imagine anything you want. Now, in 1666, there was a terrible fire in London, and it all burned to the ground. It was all a medieval wooden city. And the king rushed to Wren and said, "Oh, Wren, here's our opportunity to get rid of the twisty, narrow, horrible streets of old medieval London and rebuild it on a modern plan." And Wren concocted this plan. It's essentially a grid of streets over which he laid very wide diagonal avenues that radiate out from important points here, these great plazas that would have huge buildings. He said St. Paul's Cathedral should get built here, and then there would be all these long vistas down straight streets. Well, he didn't invent this. It came from Baroque Rome, where the popes carved great diagonal avenues through the existing ancient fabric of the city of Rome to connect all the churches of pilgrimage in Rome. With all the pilgrims coming there, they were constantly getting lost. And so the popes made these great avenues and huge piazzas. This is the Piazza del Popolo. Off to the left are two pilgrimage churches. And in each one of the piazzas, they set up these old Egyptian obelisks that were all lying around that had been brought back by the Romans after conquering Mark Antony and so on and so forth. And so we get this new dynamic sense of urban space where you can see for miles across a city down these great avenues. Of course, here's the grand pilgrimage church, and all of them is St. Peter's in the Vatican, way back there in the background. So that's what Wren is imitating, that sort of thing. Wren's plan came to nothing. While the embers were still hot, landowners rushed back in and built up medieval London on the same street plan. But there was an echo of it that actually did get built in the New World. Here's the plan for the first planned city in America, which supplanted malarial Jamestown. On higher ground, they built a town that came to be known as Williamsburg, that became the new capital city of the colony of Virginia. And it's embryonically the same idea as this. There are four major buildings here. A college, a university founded in 1693, 3, I think. The House of Government down here, connected by a great 1 mile long wide avenue that becomes known as Duke of Gloucester Street. In the middle of it is the market square that has a courthouse and the church, and then a great wide greensward leads up to the house of the royal governor that was so grand that it became known as the palace. So in embryonic form, we have this kind of Baroque city plan that Wren envisioned for London. So down at one end, this building looks like this. It's the original college building for William and Mary, and it's in fact called the Wren Building, named for Sir Christopher Wren. It's dead symmetrical. There's no Gothic parts here anymore. All the windows align, even with the dormers, and the chimneys are all symmetrical and everything. And it's dominated by a kind of pediment-crowned central portico where the door is, the pediment being a major element of classicism. It has a classical cornice right where the roof starts, and it has this great cupola. All the monumental buildings in America at the time were essentially large houses that were made to look grand by having cupolas put on the top. And the roof here is a reverse curve, a kind of an S curve, that's typical of Baroque architecture. We call that an OG curve. The Wren Building conspicuously resembles some of the grand country homes of England of that time, of the Wren Baroque period. This is one called Coles Hill by an architect named Sir Roger Pratt, and it has all the same attributes as the Wren Building. We don't know who designed the Wren Building. It certainly wasn't Sir Christopher Wren, although there were historians in the 30s that claimed that. But it's modeled conspicuously on these kinds of houses with their wonderful Baroque cupolas up on the top and all of that. The other major buildings in Williamsburg are the Capitol building at the other end, the House of Government, given a Roman name, Capitol. Here is a recreation of it, and it has these great rounded ends, a rounded loggia in the middle, and another one of these Baroque cupolas placed on the top. Lots of round stuff, round windows. So this is in a colonial, rather folk-level situation. This is a kind of an echo of all the high-style buildings in the mother country. The church, Bruton Parish Church, imitates the one thing that came of the Great Fire for Wren was a commission to design more than 60 churches that had burned in the fire. And he could only be that prolific by adopting a kind of model, and each of the churches follows that model with little variations. The model is box on back, tower on front, and then a kind of a spire, which is really a Gothic thing, not classical, but made out of classical parts. We'll see a couple of them in a minute. So Bruton Parish Church is a kind of what we call a Wren-type church. So it's fairly modern, although most of the ornaments only on the inside. What we do have is round-topped windows here that are called roundels, and that's typical of this style. And then the grandest of all the buildings is the palace where the governor lived. We know, this is a recreation also, but we know a lot more about the fact that this is an accurate recreation because the last governor to live here was also an architect and hated this building and measured drawings of it with an eye towards renovating it, making it more modern. That was Governor Thomas Jefferson, who fled from here to go home to Monticello when the British invaded Williamsburg. It's completely symmetrical, 2 stories high and then a very steep roof with symmetrical chimneys and a great Baroque cupola. The whole ensemble here of outbuildings that we call dependencies is symmetrical about this imaginary line right down the middle here. String courses, cornice, a balustrade at the top, all these classical elements now. But the most classical thing about it is the thing that's invisible in plain sight, which is its complete symmetry, a very grand way of making a house. And so from this point forward, the new plantation homes built in Virginia in this new Wren Baroque style imitated. This is one called Shirley. Here's the James River just beyond it. Like the Governor's Palace, it's 2 stories plus an attic with now a double-story high kind of portico on the front. There's a great axial driveway that leads you up to it. You just see peeking out here the sort of symmetrical dependencies that flank that way along into it. It's very much like typical English country homes of the same time. This is one called Ashdown House, where you see the axis of symmetry going right through the front door and out the back door and through the garden and all the way down to the river beyond. with this curving Baroque-style landscaping going on. Landscaping in the Baroque period was essentially an exercise in drawing curvy designs on the ground out of living matter, out of plants. And then, of course, the dependencies are symmetrical also here, and we have a great cupola on the top. So this is sort of typical of the Ren Baroque style in England. In Virginia, the grand planters had become very wealthy indeed. They thought of themselves now as a kind of British aristocracy. This is the Lee family home up on the northern neck. It abuts the Potomac River, downriver from Washington. It's called Stratford Hall. It's shaped like an H in plan. It has these magnificent chimneys rising out of all the rooms inside that are now gathered together with arches and form little balconies out there on the roof. So you can look all the way down a mile along an axis to your ships coming and going down there on the Potomac River. The living quarters are on the upper floor, and the bedrooms are on the ground floor here, so it's different. Here's the main perfectly cubic ballroom that's right in the middle here. That's the door into it, and from this door you could look down to the river. And it has on the inside now all this Baroque classical ornament used as wall decoration, not just on the outside, but now also the inside as well. Here it is further back. You see all the symmetrical dependencies, the smokehouses, and the kitchens and the stables and all of that flank it. It's a very grand building. Here's a plan of it. I don't know if you can all see this. Here's the house, shaped like an H, and these are all the dependencies. And there were gardens to either side on the cross axis. This is the formal garden. The other one was a kitchen garden. And you see all these minor and major axes of symmetry on the land as well. So this idea of classical order and geometry is not just in the house, but extends from it out into the landscape all the way over. I love to show it, but this is typical, not typical, this is one of the grand country houses in England. This is Castle Howard in Yorkshire, where lots of TV series have been filmed. And this was designed by Sir John Vanbrugh. He's a very well-known architect, also designed Blenheim Palace for the Duke of Marlborough. But this is one of these buildings that's not only symmetrical, but it just goes on and on and on and on and on. Made out of stone this time. Horace Walpole, a great wag, writing in a London newspaper upon hearing of Sir John Vanbrugh's death, wrote a little one-verse poem that he said should be carved on his tombstone. It's, under thy feet, dear reader, survey poor Sir John Vanbrugh's house of clay. Lie upon him heavy, earth, for he many a heavy pile hath lain on thee. I love that one. Okay, one of the more beautiful plantation homes in Virginia in the Ren Baroque style is Westover, of about 1720, the seat of the very wealthy William Byrd II, B-Y-R-D. It's very understated. It's made of this beautiful orange raspberry colored clay brick. And the big focus here, typical of American Ren Baroque buildings, is the doorway. Not much else other than the symmetry. So this is the door up close, made of stone. He didn't invent this, but this is the absolutely dead typical Baroque version of a pediment. No longer triangular. The microwave made it curl and melt, and it's all kind of, we call it a scroll or a swan's neck or a split pediment here, standing on its own cornice and entablature with classical columns, in this case flat columns called pilasters to either side. He didn't invent this, it came out of a book. He had the biggest library in Virginia, including architecture books, and here's the model for his doorway from a little book called Palladio Londinensis by two brothers named Solomon. And that book was all over the colonies, and so we begin to see this same sort of thing all over the place. Well, we don't see it here. This is the foyer in Westover. So this is that door that has the pediment over, and when you come inside, you realize you're now off-center. There's this grand staircase, and Baroque ornament made out of plaster up here on the ceiling. Closer to home, we have the Isaac Royal House, just here in Medford, which if you haven't been there, you must go. Wonderful sort of thing. This is another Baroque version of a pediment where it's curved. rather than triangular. We call that a segmental pediment. And every little window now, in order for Sir Isaac Royal to show off his vast wealth, every window gets a pediment, sort of baby pediments. And then it's made of wood, but the wood here is fake. It's carved to look like blocks of stone, but it isn't at all. And it's been painted with a gray paint that has had sand thrown in it to make it kind of look like stone. Here's a famous one, the Wentworth Gardner House up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. There's all New England versions of this stuff, with the same doorway from the same book, fake quoins at the corners that are actually made of wood. And again, the wooden facade here is carved to sort of try and look like stone. It's much more convincing on the inside. This is the stairwell, upper stairwell in this house, and you see all the wonderful pilasters and the cornice and all this gorgeous woodwork, carved woodwork here that forms the Baroque ornament on the inside of the house. Also in Portsmouth, the Moffat Ladd House. Here they are, they're going wild with coins, and then mama and baby scroll pediments up here. And out in the wilderness, in the frontier, out in Deerfield, Massachusetts, which was right at the edge of civilization at the time, the Dwight Barnard House, which is more of a kind of first period house that's just one room deep, but on its facade, it's like Betsy McCall paper dolls here. It's had these elements taken out of books and then sort of changed by a carpenter who wasn't quite sure what he was doing, pasted on over the window. So we have these weird kind of pediments here, and then the scroll pediment over the doorway that's a little bit too tall, a little exuberant there. And then a real first period house. Here's an old, this is also in Deerfield, the Williams house, an old salt box that was brought up to date by having these little pediments stuck on the outside. Bring it into the next sort of style. And then the high-style urban version of all of this can be seen in the MacFavis Warner House in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. A rich merchant who owned ships was one of the first people in New England to be able to build in brick, a kind of permanent building for himself. And so this looks sort of like a small version of the Wren building, for example, with symmetrical windows and balustrades and a cupola up on the top, trying to make himself look like an institution, I guess. And in fact, it's the institutions that borrow this kind of residential scale architecture and make it a little bit bigger and put cupolas on it to try and make it look more monumental. So here's the old State House in Boston, originally built in 1718, with these Flemish end walls like we saw before. Everything now symmetrical. We have a pediment over the doorway, and then this multi-stage cupola with an OG roof over the top, perfectly Baroque. Faneuil Hall originally looked like this, designed by a painter named John Slyber, same sort of thing. This is the first application in the New World of a classical Roman order on the outside of a building. These are pilasters made of brick, but they're supposed to look like the Colosseum in Rome, borrowing from it. Erase in your mind's eye this grand tower. It was built later. This is the original State House of the colony of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, now known, of course, today as Independence Hall, because of the signs of the Declaration of Independence there. But initially, it was just kind of a big house with a balustrade and chimneys on either end. And the old colony house in Newport, Rhode Island, the seat of government for the colony of Rhode Island, made by a carpenter, kind of an amateur at design. So everything is a little weird. It clips on the pediment so that you can see the cupola right beyond. The dormers have rounded pediments, but their bottoms curve also. And then this looks more like a crab that got squished here by the corners. But anyway, these were grand buildings in the day. And then finally there are churches, like before. This is backwards, but this is Old North Church, which is its nickname. This is the third building to bear the name Old North Church in Boston. It's Christ Church, an Anglican church, and it's the first Wren-type church built anywhere in British colonies. It's 1723 is its date. Box on back, tower in front, and then this spire that looks kind of Gothic, but it's made out of layers of classical kinds of architecture. Christ Church imitates a specific Wren church in London, this one, the tower anyway, which is St. Stephen Walbrook, one of these more than 60 churches that Wren designed. St. Stephen Walbrook is domed and it's different on the inside, but the tower was very much the model for our our building. And our building immediately became the model for all kinds of other churches through the colonies. This, just 2 years later, is Trinity Church in Newport, Rhode Island, built of wood, not brick. But the architect here, or the carpenter who designed it, absolutely imitated Christ Church in Cambridge. Here's the inside, and this is where it gets more Baroque. There's lots of curvy stuff going on here. Over your head, and the apse where the altar is at the end is all curvy. The side galleries get curving vaults. It's all plaster, none of it's stone. But or the voice reflector that's above the pulpit here with its OG shape, and all these beautiful curving chandeliers we see here, all of that is very much Baroque. Here's another Wren church in London. This is St. Mary le Bow, and its tower was the model for, inexplicably, the first Puritan meeting house in Boston to be built looking like a church. They were so jealous of the Anglicans of Christ Church that those who built the Old South Meeting House decided they wanted it to look like that. And so they built a meeting house that looked like a Wren church. The front door is not here, it's around on the side on Franklin Street, and the pulpit is here on this side. So it's like those other meeting houses we saw, but now brought forward in style to the Wren Baroque. And so this is kind of a variant with its little dormers up there of St. Mary le Bow, with the kind of rounded colonnade and then little dormers going up the spire here. And here's the interior of Old South, which is, again, a great big meeting house box, now with galleries on 2 levels rather than just 1. And that's it. And now we come to our final style, which is, of all of them, probably the most sophisticated. The man standing in the statue here is Andrea Palladio. His dates are 1508 to 1580, and he came to kind of dominate his century, the 1500s, as an architect. He was born and lived his whole life in the town of Vicenza, which is in the north of Italy, not too far south of the Alps. And Vicenza was filled with a lot of wealthy families who made their wealth by owning farms out in the countryside surrounding the town. And he grew in stature as an architect to the point where they patronized him almost exclusively, so he got all kinds of commissions. He designed 3 kinds of buildings. He did a handful of churches. Most of them are in Venice, which is very near Vicenza. And most of them are houses. Townhouses, what the Italians would have called palazzi, or palaces, in town, and then villas out in the countryside, which are kind of very artistic working farms and farmhouses for these same families. In this slide, we see behind Palladio is a building of his own design, which was a kind of market hall and meeting place. It was very much like Faneuil Hall in Boston, with markets on the ground story and a great meeting hall up above, called the Basilica, because it had this inner chamber and then outer aisles that were actually balconies that went all the way around the building. But in order to make this all work, Palladio invented a way of using Roman columns. He was very interested in Roman architecture, went to Rome and measured buildings and all of that. We have big ones called colossal order columns, and then little ones here. So it's like mama and baby columns. The big ones support a major cornice here that divides the building into 2 floors. And the little ones support little pieces of cornice that leave behind the big columns, and then support arches that form points of entry along the side into this loggia, or this aisle behind him. And so in using the large columns to divide the little ones into what we call bays, repeating bays, he makes a kind of a shape here, which is a tall, round-headed space that has on either side of it these narrow little rectangular spaces, all enclosed in classical architecture. Well, of course, this comes to be known as the Palladian motif. He used it again and again in his buildings. It's used also for windows, in which case it's called a Palladian window. But in order to be a Palladian window, it can't just be a round-topped window. It has to have the 2 narrow side pieces with it as well. Okay? Now, on the right is probably his most well-known building, which is one of these villas out in the countryside. This is the only one of about 30 or 35 villas that he designed that is not a working farm. This is just a pleasure palace in the country. Just outside of Vicenza, it crowns a hill. And it's made of perfect geometries. It's a cube that has a rotunda in the middle of it that's capped by a dome, and has these 4 Roman temple fronts on each of the 4 facades, oriented exactly north, south, east, and west, right at the top of the hill. So the dome kind of completes the idea of a hill. It's called the Villa Rotunda for obvious reasons, and is well known to anybody who knows anything about architecture. Not only because it's wonderful and famous, but because Palladio was the first architect to ever get the idea to market himself by publishing his designs in a book, which turned out to be so large that it was printed in 4 volumes, called The 4 Books of Architecture, I Quattro Libri d'Architettura. And over the sort of century after Palladio's death, they became translated eventually into a multitude of languages. So by about 1700 or so, the 4 Books of Architecture had been translated into English and sparked a huge burst of enthusiasm for Palladio's architecture. So the next generation in England after Wren grew up with the ideal of imitating Palladio in the design of modern buildings. For example, there are a multitude of country houses in England that are patterned after the Villa Rotunda. Here's one. This is called Mereworth Castle. Why it's a castle, I don't know. But with its domed rotunda rising from the middle, it's very much like, and here's a kind of little, it got pregnant and gave birth to a little Villa Rotunda here. This is another one called Chiswick House, which is now suburban London. It was out in the country when it was built by Lord Burlington, who was a fanatic devotee of Palladio, and gathered a whole group of architects around him to teach them to design in Palladian style. The one architect he didn't gather is the one whose name goes with this time period, the most well-known Palladian architect in England, James Gibbs. And this is probably Gibbs's most well-known building. This is the Church of St. Martin's in the Fields at Trafalgar Square in London. And it's a variant on the Wren type church. There's a box on the back here, and there's a tower, and there's a spire. But he's wrapped the whole thing like a present. And the ribbon is Roman architecture. We've got a great Roman temple front as a portico that where the tower is suppressed back behind it. So it's not a disparate element sticking on the front of the building, but rather grows from within. And then this order of great columns and the cornice that it supports goes all the way around the building and kind of ties it all together. Here's the back side of St. Martin's in the Fields, where we see the order of pilasters riding all the way around. There's a great pediment in the back. And then the dead giveaway as to what the style is here, which is a huge Palladian window placed so that it would be above the altar on the inside of the church. So we have, excuse me, well, I should show you the inside of the church. And here's an engraving of what it looked like in Gibbs's day. It has a tall vaulted nave, and then there are these colossal order columns that are supporting little pieces of cornice up here, from which the vaulting is springing, and vaulting over the side galleries here. This is still very much a Protestant kind of church. It has galleries. A typical medieval church doesn't have galleries, it has side aisles. And then, of course, you see the effect of the huge Palladian window down there in the chancel at the far end. St. Martin's in the Fields was wildly popular because Gibbs, also in imitation of Palladio, in 1723 published a book of his own works, engravings. And those came immediately into the colonies and spawned a whole lot of copies. Included among them is the church we see on the left, which is St. Michael's in Charleston, South Carolina. Anywhere that has a palmetto tree is bound to be Charleston. No palmetto, so it must be somewhere else. It's Providence, Rhode Island. This is the first Baptist meeting house up by Rhode Island School of Design and Brown University. And the builder who built this was picking and choosing things out of Gibbs's book. So we get a Palladian window, we get a Roman temple, we get another pediment up here, but it's still sort of unlike this, we don't have a big real Roman temple front dominating the front of the building. So it's still kind of a box stuck on the front of the bigger box. And then there's this very Gibbsian kind of steeple rising from the middle. It's Gibbsian because Gibbs designed it. Here's a plate from Gibbs's book showing the 3 different designs he came up with for the steeple of St. Martin in the Fields. The one that got picked is this one, ultimately. These 2 were also Rand's. In England's Got Talent, but America got talent by copying this one in wood on the Baptist Meeting House in Providence. So it's a complete copy out of Gibbs's book. Now we have Gibbs Palladian stuff near at hand too. This is sort of the country mouse from the same hand. It was Peter Harrison. Harrison was a native of Newport, Rhode Island, was a wealthy rum merchant. He became very wealthy, but his great passion was architecture. He collected a huge number of architecture books, but his favorite was Gibbs. And so he was quite skilled at designing buildings based on things that he saw in Gibbs's book. This is Christ Church, Cambridge, in Harvard Square. This was the country mouse because there was a fairly small Anglican community in Puritan-dominated Cambridge. This is about 1740 or so. And so it's a little wood-framed building that has, on the outside, it has round-headed windows that look red Baroque. What's missing on the outside are the shutters, or what are known as blinds, actually, on the outside. The blinds that would open and create the impression of a lot of Palladian shapes. So the little side rectangles are missing here. But if you go inside, we have a Palladian window down here at the end. We have the same thing here where the shutters on the inside are still intact with the round-headed windows. So you have a series of what look like Palladian shapes coming down the side aisles. We have Gibbs's little columns that are supporting little pieces of cornice up above, a vaulted center. But what you don't immediately appreciate is that if you made a cross-section through this space, what would you have? You'd have a Palladian shape with the flat-roofed side aisles and then the round-topped nave in the middle. So the actual space is actually Palladian. Harrison got commissioned by a much wealthier congregation of Anglicans in Boston to design a building for them. The building we know as King's Chapel is a Harrison design that's vaguely Gibbsian, box on the back, and instead of having a temple front, it's got this sort of colossal order portico that wraps around the tower, which is stuck on the front of the building. It was supposed to have a huge spire, but it never got built because along came the Revolution, and the Tory congregation fled Boston when the Revolution came, left their building unfinished. The other very American thing is that, of course, the colossal order columns in the front are hollow wood. They look like stone. They're painted with sanded paint, but you can rap on them and hear distinct echoing going on the inside. It's one of the most glorious of all colonial interiors. Very beautiful. One of the first buildings in Boston made of stone, the first serious one made of stone. And here's the interior, which is actually better than Gibbs. It's better than St. Martin's in the Fields. With its now paired columns here, they're fluted Corinthian columns. They're much fancier, carrying slightly bigger blocks of cornice here. And then there's a vaulted ceiling and the Palladian window down here at the far end. So, have you all been, I assume you've all been inside this building at some point. If you haven't, shame on you, and go run down there tomorrow. It's glorious. It's called King's Chapel. It's right at the corner of Tremont Street and School Street. And its burying ground is the second oldest burying ground in Boston. Also worth the view. Okay, and then finally, and I like to compare an actual photograph of St. Martin's in the Fields with King's Chapel to show you that it's pretty near as sophisticated as the London building. Harrison designed many others, including the first private library in what will become the United States. It's called the Redwood Library, and it's in Newport, his hometown. And in it, he's imitating Palladio. We have a building that's this wide, but the temple front on the front is a continuation of the same wider pediment here that covers over the whole thing. And that motif comes from one of Palladio's churches in Venice. This is the famous church of San Giorgio Maggiore When you stand by the Duke's Palace beside the water, and you look across to an island that has a church on it, it's this one. It has a great bell tower in the back. Palladio solved the problem of what to do with the front end of a basilica, which is tall in the middle and lower where the side aisles are here. And he solved it by interweaving two temple fronts, a wide, low one that stands on the ground, and a tall, narrow one that stands on pedestals down here. It's colossal order column. So here's in a kind of folk level imitation is Harrison's Redwood Library. Harrison also designed in Newport the kind of the Newport version of Faneuil Hall, a market building called the Old Brick Market, originally open arches on the ground story as Faneuil Hall was, and then a big meeting room up above. And in this, he's imitating a very well-known English Palladian building in London. It's a government building that's down by the river called Somerset House by Sir William Chambers. And what Chambers is doing is imitating, move forward here, imitating Palladio's townhouses, the palazzi in Vicenza. This is one called, by Palladio, called the Palazzo del Porto Festa, named for the family that commissioned it. Almost all of his palazzi are dense on the ground story with lots of carved blocks of stone and some variant of kind of an arched opening down here with a big door in the middle. And then there's a big line, and the living quarters are up above. The main rooms are on what the Italians call the piano nobile, or the noble level, with great big windows and colossal order columns up above. There's another story hiding up here that are bedrooms. Usually Palladio puts classical statues up there. There's an awful lot of salad going on up there, up against the sky where your eye can see things far away. So that's the general pattern. And of course, Somerset House then follows that exactly. We have big stone blocks on the ground story, arched openings, and then the piano nobile and the floor above that have these, now they're pilasters, not columns, but and the main floor windows get pediments just as we see here. So he's copying Palladio, and go back to the brick market, same thing here. And so this is a very standard Palladian motif. You'll see it all over. Go look at the State House in downtown Boston, and you'll see exactly the same thing. Forward. And if you travel through Europe, you'll bump into it everywhere. This is Gibbs. This is the Radcliffe camera at Oxford University, and it's a Palladian palazzo in the round. He's made it into a dome thing, but we see the rusticated, which means carved stone, and arched openings on the ground story, and then the colossal order floors up above that, and balustrades and statues and all of that. And then in this case, he's also added the dome. In Paris, it's the east wing of the Louvre Palace, same sort of thing. This is instantly recognizable. The Boston Athenaeum is exactly one of these as well. And then finally, I'll just end with some country houses. This is from Palladio's book, a design of a country villa, a farmhouse that he designed, called the Villa Cornaro. And this proved to be the model for, particularly a perfect model for southern plantation houses just before the Revolution. This is the famous Drayton Hall, which is outside of Charleston, South Carolina. This is the land facade, not the water facade. But whoever designed this in the main block borrowed this motif of a pediment or a temple front, in this case on 2 floors, half indented into the building and half projecting from it. Palladio's villas are all the same. They're symmetrical. So here we have an A, B, C, B, A kind of rhythm across the front. And they're always dominated in the middle by a projecting temple front of some kind or another, crowned by a pediment. So in this case, it's 2 stories high, and it's half in and half out of the building, just as we see there. Here's the actual Villa Cornaro that this is an engraving of. You can see it in kind of 3 dimensions here. And here's a townhouse in Charleston, the Miles Bruton House, from about 1745 or so. Ditto, same sort of motif. So anywhere where you see a house that's kind of a block of a building with some kind of pedimented temple front in the middle, or just a pediment, it's bound to be Palladian. Like this. This is another villa by Palladio, the Villa Badoer in northern Italy. In this case, the temple front is completely indented into the front of the building. And then from it, symmetrically, we have curving connector pieces called hyphens, and then the outbuildings of the farm here that contain all the farm equipment and the animals and all that sort of thing. The interiors of all these are filled with frescoes and mosaics, and they're absolutely gorgeous. Here's the American version. This is a plantation home in Virginia called Mount Airy, up in the north on the northern neck, with its little temple front dominating things. This is in Philadelphia. We're missing the hyphens, the connector pieces. This is Mount Pleasant. In case you didn't get the idea, the pediment has a Palladian window right in the middle. This is the Hammond Harwood House, which is in Annapolis, Maryland. And here we have all the pieces, A, B, C, D, C, B, A, all the way across, all connected into one great thing. Homewood, outside of Baltimore. You're getting good at this now. You can recognize Palladian-derived houses. Here's one, minus the dependencies. This is Cliveden, which is in Philadelphia, made of stone, complete with the urns and then all the doodads up here on the roof. And then the last two slides I'll show you are the New England wooden version of all of this, not nearly so grand. The Lady Pepperell House in Kittery, Maine. It's missing a porch, otherwise it would be completely symmetrical, A, B, C, D, A. And then close to home is one of the most well-known of all, which is the famous Thomas Vassall House. None of you know it as the Vassall House. You all know it as the Longfellow House because the poet lived there. But he didn't build it. It was built by Thomas Vassall, who was a Tory and fled and abandoned his house in 1775 when the Revolution came. So pure Palladianism, with everything completely symmetrical going out. And if this were a working farm, there would have been an attached outbuildings here that would also have been symmetrical. And then the Revolution came and everything changed. One thing that didn't change is the influence of Palladio. So the next style after the war is the federal style, and it still has a lot of Palladian stuff in it. But that is another night. So we're waiting for another blizzard-driven night to schedule that. Anyway, who has questions? Anybody?
Your architecture.
The widow's walk transcends many styles. It's not part of a specific style. And it's in most cases, it's a functional part. You will find them more typically on houses near ports, where someone could go up and watch the activity of the port to see if your ships are coming and going or something like that. And which is, of course, why it's called a widow's walk. You know, the wife of the family would go up there to see if her husband had been at sea for 2 years, was coming home or not, or if she was a widow.
Did they exist in a certain period of American life?
No, they certainly would be Ren Baroque and Palladian and probably federal style and beyond that. It was really more of a functional part than a style-giving part. I presume shutters were a fairly simple device that was invented to close the sun out but allow the air to come through a house and to give yourself some privacy and inside. They've always been functional elements up until the 20th century, where we stamped them on vinyl and screwed them onto the house. One of the interesting things about the shutters on the Vassall House is bad planning. Where the central pediment part projects forward a little bit, there's a shutter there, but it won't open flat against the house. It opens into the corner, so it's sort of weirdly stuck on. And almost always, these are actually not shutters; they're blinds. Shutters are what are on the inside and generally fold into pockets in the walls. And so they have separate names. Okay, I'll let you all go home now.